I had my own graphic design business in Bend, Oregon from 2001 to 2017. And that was my main income, was that business. And then I was balancing, I got sponsored in '03, um, and then have been sponsored ever since. So there's been always an athlete bucket, so to speak, which didn't have any money in the 2000s. Not until about 2010, 2011 did we start getting a small stipend on a monthly basis, or an annual basis, depending on the sponsor. And you were like juggling 4 or 5 sponsors just to get a few $1,000s, in the early days. Now that's evolved since then, right? Over the last 15 years, especially the last 10 years. But like that whole piece of the puzzle, I didn't really start to get an income from running until like, after 2011 probably. And so then there was a small paycheck, and then I could like justify like my training time and some travel time. Yeah, exactly.
So Jeff, how did you first get into running? Was it a different sport or a different thing altogether?
For me, I started out like, 70s, 80s kid, playing traditional sports in the Midwest, football, basketball, baseball, track and field. Kind of played 4 sports a year, really focused on football, and track and field. So I ran the 800 and kind of ran, distance in track and field. And then was, football. We were a small school, so I was on the field the whole time. I played both sides of the ball, cornerback and wide receiver. So like was never came off the field really. So there's a lot of endurance training in there that was, secretly happening that I didn't know was endurance training. But I also got into, weights and strength training in high school as well. My football coach was an early adopter of the weight room. So we were on the University of Nebraska strength training program that they were famous for in the 80s, their football team. One of our offensive coordinator had gone to University of Nebraska, and so he brought that strength training program to us in the 80s, and I started doing it in 8th grade all the way through senior year. 8-week cycle, max, 1 rep max every 8 weeks, get a new workout. We did everything. We had a ton of guys, hip sledding over 1,000 pounds and bench pressing 250, 225, stuff like that. So I was benching by senior year over 200. So it was it was good for like, a kid that's developing and, free testosterone when you're that age. So I made use of it, I guess.
It's interesting to hear that you were like really into like the strength, power, team sport, because that almost like they can go against each other, but then they can also go hand in hand with running because you do need cushioning, so to speak, for your joints. But you obviously don't want to be lugging around like a ton of weight. But yeah, just being on the field with football and just having a knack for doing something really, really difficult at such a young age, that's like a little bit of foreshadowing for running long distances.
Yeah, and and that transitioned into like intramural sports the first couple years of college, just for fun, and then I kept strength training, but I got into mountain biking, um, probably my junior year of college, and then I was like all in. Worked at a bike shop, early adopter of mountain bikes in the early '90s. So I was riding mountain bikes in single track and taking trips to Colorado and taking trips to Moab and Arizona all through college, the second half of college. Every spring break, every break we got, me and my buddies were on the road. Instead of going to Padre Island to party, we were going to mountain bike. So I really got into, kind of the mountain biking side of things, the cycling side of things in my 20s, and did that pretty hardcore. Dabbled in backpacking and climbing, but then I found I always was running though the whole time. Like, like 3, 4 days a week, I go out and run for 20, 30 minutes, and that kind of thing. But then, started kind of dabbling in trail running in Colorado after college when I moved to Denver. And then I started dabbling more when I moved to Bend, Oregon in 2000. And then that's when I really started trail running kind of regularly. And then I had a buddy who had just kind of started dabbling in marathons and 50Ks, ultra marathon races. And He introduced me to 100 milers. And so, before I even ran an ultra, I had heard of Western States 100, and I was like, oh man, it was kind of like, how people go, oh, I want to run a marathon. I kind of was like, oh, I want to run a 100 miler. And I hadn't even run a marathon yet. So I decided I'd run a half marathon, a marathon in 2000, and then a 50K and 50 miler to qualify to get into the lottery in 2001, and then got into the race for 2002. So by that time, I had 5 or 6 ultra marathons under my belt, before I towed the line in my first 100 miler in 2002. So that's kind of was my kind of on ramp to ultra running.
Were there any like big obstacles initially that you had found, or was there like immediate success?
No, I was just doing them to do them, to finish them. Um, and it was just for fun. I was still climbing, I was still mountain biking. Um, but coming from cycling, I hadn't done a ton of running. I've run maybe 3 times a week, 20, 30 minutes. So like an hour of volume a week running does not translate to ramping up to 6 to 10 hours of training a week. So to run ultra marathons. So I did a lot of volume on the bike. I had a lot of setbacks in the first 3 or 4 seasons, 3 seasons especially. So 01, 02, 03 were kind of like, and into 04, we're all kind of like, I had something every season where it was like, I had runner's knee one year. I had like IT band syndrome. Then I had like plantar fasciitis, and I had all these things that would pop up, and I had to be back on the bike. I couldn't do a ton. It was really a frustrating time. Because I loved trail running, and I was kind of all in, but I kept having to go back to the bike, and kept having to take 4 to 6 weeks off here and there. I finally, and I actually had taken a hiatus. We were talking about strength training. There's two factors that I think really messed with me in those first 3 or 4 years. One was my wife and I were dabbling in vegetarianism in our 20s. And I just, man, we did not thrive on that at all. And we dabbled in it. My wife was pretty hardcore for 7 years in our 20s. I would say I was a fair weather vegetarian. Like I would do it for a while and just give it that try. And I would be craving protein so much because I worked out so much, because I would go like sneak a bunch of salmon and eggs and stuff like that. And finally we just threw our hands up in 2004, and went back to like eating meat and just doing like good stuff, grass fed, free range, organic. And so we started doing like kind of whole foods organic again. And then that combined with strength training, at the same time, because I'd taken a hiatus maybe 3 or 4 years there where I wasn't lifting consistently. I was lifting occasionally, but I just wasn't like, it was in my early career. I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't afford a gym, so I was like not doing a ton. I do some push-ups, I do some pull-ups and more climbing type workouts, but I really wasn't like actively like on it. And then in 2004-05 off season, I was just having so many injuries and I was getting frustrated. I went to a strength training coach. I was a graphic designer and I used it. I had no money. I worked a deal with Trade Out for this guy, and he had a private gym, and he trained me in the off season 2 days a week and then 1 day a week during the season, in from 04, 05, or see, yeah, 04, 05 into 06. And then I went out on my own and did my own thing from that point. But I was consistent with strength training pretty much from that point forward. But he kind of like really got me back after all the muscle I'd lost as a vegetarian. He got my muscle back. He actually overcompensated, man. I was like 140, probably 140 pounds as a vegetarian. And he ballooned me up to 158, but like tons of muscle. And then it all came back down into the 140s again, after a couple years. So it took like 2 years and I was like back down lean. And that's when I kind of started winning in 05. I had my first 100-mile win. and it was a combination of all of a sudden I was training consistently. I had figured out this thing with he had diagnosed, this was an interesting one because all the cycling, when you're clipped in a bike and you're pulling on the backstroke, right? Because you have cleats on and you're clipped into the pedal. One of the things that you do is you kind of overdevelop your hamstrings, and then kind of you're developing your upper quad in cycling, but not really the VMO, which is that teardrop muscle right above the knee on the inside of the quad. That is really responsible for proper knee tracking and running, and that was like weak compared to my hamstrings, and it should be the opposite. Leg curl, leg extension should be like uh, you should be able to lift 150% of what you lift in a leg curl. You should do in a leg, or in a leg curl, you should do in leg extension, meaning your quads should be 1.5 times stronger than your hamstrings. And I was the opposite from all those years of hard cycling. Like I was riding like 5-6 days a week for like a decade before I got really into running. I had all these imbalances that didn't affect me on the bike. They just affected me when I started putting volume on my legs, right? When my knee wasn't quite tracking correctly. So he really fixed in one winter. That guy like got me so strong. And it just shows that even if you have imbalances, if you have very focused strength training regimen, and he was writing those programs, he was making me go to a max and then helping me 3 or 4 after, when I went to failure, which that builds muscle so fast. If you have someone standing over you, helping you, not everyone can do that, but I needed it at that little window of time to get me really strong in a short amount of time. And then from that point forward, all of a sudden I was training consistently from 05 on, no setbacks. I mean, from that point forward, I rarely, besides maybe 09 when I had bad plantar fasciitis, and I had to actually, I raced my mountain bike that half that year, went back to racing mountain bikes because I was just like, I got to quit running. And at that point, I was 4 or 5 years since 05. I kind of look at like 01 to 04 kind of as those intro years when I wasn't consistent because I kept getting injured. And then finally 05 through like from 05 on, I was pretty consistent besides 09. And there's one other little bout in 2011. I had some injuries, but like other than that, most of the time it was stupid stuff. Like I'd drop a ladder on my toe or something, or 2011, I ran into the back of an SUV commuting on my bike and broke my hand. It was all kind of stupid stuff that didn't have anything to do with like overtraining your legs. But anyway, I think the strength training was a huge component. And the other component I feel like that's really helped over the years is diet, the evolution of diet. And it's been quite an evolution going from like vegetarianism to like kind of whole foods organic for like 12 years to like more grain free, sugar free, seed oil free, high protein focus. Even like using keto occasionally and some intermittent fasting occasionally, but mainly being like moderate low carb and high protein. That's really my focus now. 175 to 200 grams of carbs a day, mainly from like fruit and starch like potatoes, and vegetables. So it's kind of a paleo style food list a little bit, but I do raw dairy and cultured dairy and raw cheese and that kind of stuff. Quite a bit of dairy, unlike most paleo diets. But I would call it more of a animal centered ancestral diet, probably a better term.
You're only eating 175 to 200 grams of carbs per day.
Yeah. Yeah, but I eat like 150 to 180 grams of protein.
That's modest. Yeah, like how much are you training right now? Because I know you said like you've been, dealing with some injuries, like in like the
Like
peak of your
I'm not
training.
injured now. 15 years now, or 15, probably 15 hours. This last week was probably 15 hours. I would guess off the top of my head, probably 15 to 16 hours worth of training. I guess if you threw in strength training, it's probably more like 17 or 18 hours. But I eat so much protein because I only weigh about 140 pounds. So I'm doing 1.1 to 1.3 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which is a lot of protein. you know,
How old are you?
54.
Man, I like, and it's funny because like I teach this day to day with my students and like my clients and everything that like when you turn 30, every decade after 30, you can lose anywhere from 3 to 8% of your muscle mass from sarcopenia. And the best thing that
Oh,
you
yeah.
can do is just, continue to exercise, lift heavy, eat high protein. And that's now becoming the forefront of science and application. And it makes me so happy to hear you say that you're like, yeah, I'm eating like 1 to 1.25 grams of protein per pound of body weight. And I'm like crushing these races. I'm like, I love to hear that. Because I feel like there's
Well,
so
and
many
I,
other
at
athletes who are like, oh, I
54,
don't want to have protein. It's like, no, like you need to recover.
well, it's what it is like a direct correlation to recovery. The more protein you eat, the faster you recover. I eat a ton of red meat, organ meat, nose to tail, but I do a lot of red meat. I mean, I probably eat red meat. Red meat and eggs are a staple. Like I get a half a beef of grass fed beef and have them in deep freezes. So in the garage. So we have a lot of meat. Um, if power went out, I just need to generate. I need to get a solar generator just for my freezers because there's my that will make me survive for months just on protein.
Is that one thing that really, I guess, excited you about this whole fitness and running and mountain biking and just like everything? Was the nutrition a part of it, which like really sparked your interest in addition to the training? Because some people like don't want to talk about it, and I feel like you're very in tune with what you need.
Oh, I love this. Has always been. Well, I was almost a nutrition major in college. It was either that or graphic design, and I chose graphic design. I dabbled in fine art. I dabbled in nutrition. I changed my major like four times, and but nutrition has always been like a side interest since I was young because my dad was overweight. He died with complications from type 2 diabetes. um, you know, um, my family mostly are overweight, Midwestern family. I was the only lean one in the family, and I was into like even in the '80s, I was buying Muscle and Fitness magazine, and that's where all the nutrition information was in the '80s. Was in like bodybuilding magazines. They were talking about high protein. They were talking about how to cut weight, how to lean up. They were talking about, weighing your rice, weighing your protein, your chicken breast, or whatever, right? So they were geeks about, back then, even back in the '80s, they were weighing their food, to make sure they were getting enough grams of protein a day. So they were like way ahead of their time. And I kind of found that because I was into lifting weights, because for a while I wanted to be huge. I was a football player and all the body type, unless you do it artificially with like steroids or something. But I was never willing to do that. I had a bunch of buddies that did, in that era of the late '80s, early '90s. But I have to say, I'm glad I didn't do it. But I was, but those philosophies all really got ingrained in me, and created this interest in like almost there was a moment when I was growing up that my dad, who was always overweight and definitely had, an eating disorder in the way that you overeat, right? Like everything revolved around food, whether he's happy, sad, whatever. And so one of the things I think that really like burned in my brain is at one point, and I don't know whether this was me being rebellious a little bit, but he said, um, it's just part of getting older. You gain weight. That was like that generation's perception of getting fat. And I was just like in my head, I never said it out loud because I wasn't disrespectful, but I was like in my head, I was like, no way. I had read enough Muscle and Fitness to know that you could control it with choice and willpower, So, and that's kind of where that led me on this like meandering path of nutrition, which in the early '90s was vegetarianism, which was like such a like it took me off on the wrong road for 7 years. I wish I could go back and like redo my 20s because I was so unhealthy in my 20s. Um, and then I figured it out by my early 30s. And then, like, from that point forward, we just kind of, we stayed on that general right path. We just kind of, some foods came in, some foods got thrown out, or avoided. Or minimized, I should say. That's probably a better way to put it, 90-10, 80-20 rule. You know, you don't stress about it 2 to 4 meals a week, but the rest of them count.
It's interesting, having these conversations because, like, when I was, I guess, about 15 years ago, when I was in high school, I would go on bodybuilding.com and just read like long paragraphs of like this person's diet and this person's diet. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll give that a try. And it wasn't until like college and grad school that I actually learned the actual science. And when you said like, I wish I could go back to my 20s, 30 years ago and just kind of redo everything because you could be even faster, even healthier, even stronger now. But it's like we didn't know back then. And I'm wondering like what it is right now that we're getting wrong that in 20 years from now, we're gonna be like, ah, crap. I knew I shouldn't have been shouldn't have been eating or drinking
Yeah,
that.
exactly. It's always evolving, dude. Like new information and you know, I don't know. Like I think it makes sense though from like eating a more, ancestral style diet, hunter gatherer style diet, generally. For a like general umbrella term, it's kind of like not a great term, but it is what it is, like, but understanding where we came from, I think is important to understand, you know, why, we were hunter gatherers, then hunter herders, then hunter herder farmers. You know what I mean? So like farming was like the last in the piece, and it was more like famine food. It was like, oh man, like we're having a drought, all our livestock's dying off, or they're skin and bones, and oh man, we're gonna have to eat some of this wheat. This stuff sucks. Um, but we also sprouted everything too, right? All the grains were like ancient grains and sprouted and stone ground, and most stuff was either germinated or sprouted by the time they made it into bread. You know what I mean? So I still eat, long fermented sourdough. My wife makes sourdough loaves. She just made 2 yesterday. So we do some grains, but it's like she's using a lot more of an heirloom or an ancient grain to create, and then she has that starter that she's working with for sourdough. And we'll occasionally have sprouted brown rice. you know but I make sure it's germinated and sprouted to get rid of the phytic acid and stuff like that. So I think there's important ways you can consume food and smart ways you can consume food. I don't know if you've heard of the book, Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon.
I'll
It
take
was
note of it.
based on the work. It was based on the work of Weston A. Price. Like if you go to westonAprice.org, he was in the 20s and 30s. He was a dentist that traveled all over the world looking at like pocket cultures that hadn't been influenced by Western food, and looking at through his theory was that the teeth were a window into health. So if you had like really bad crowding, bad, cavities, stuff like that, then that was a reflection of bad nutrition. And so he was way ahead of his time. Um, and so she created this book based on all his writings and all his travels. And it's like a compiled of like all these different ways to prep food and why cultures prep food a certain way and why they soak their grains to get rid of phytic acid and break down the phytates, stuff like that. So pretty interesting kind of rabbit trail if you ever want to go down it.
Have you ever dibble dabbled a bit into the whole like Mediterranean diet? Because this is kind of like the way like the conversation is going to when you talk about paleo, eating, food from the earth. That's like I love that centenarian conversation of why do some people live to be 100 in those pockets like the Fertile Crescent, California, parts of like South Korea, I think. Have you ever into that?
Yeah, and I actually have gone down the side trail of the Mediterranean diet. If you really dig into it, you realize that culture ate a ton of red meat. They ate a lot of lamb, a ton of lamb. So, like most people would say, oh yeah, it was all the olive oil. Yeah, it was olive oil and a lot of good red meat with like good fat in it. If you've ever eaten lamb, it's super fatty. It's like eating a ribeye. It's got a lot of fat in it. So um, I think that's another interesting rabbit trail, right? Like one of my favorite, another influential book for me nutrition wise was like The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Tolschlitz. That was a big one. Especially when I was coming back to eating when I was like kind of going low carb, because I went pretty strict low carb for a couple years in like about 10 years ago. And then like evolved into kind of moderate carbohydrates and more what we call OFM, optimized fat metabolism. So it's like strategic carbohydrate use around effort and volume. So you're like upping your carbs higher. Protein's always a constant, but you're upper, high protein, but you're upping your carbs depending on your training day and what kind of volume you're doing. So my easy days or rest days would be lower carb days. And then my higher carb days would be big days, where I'm doing a 6-hour run or something.
So that kind of leads me into my next question is like when you're doing 100 milers, which you'll finish in under 24 hours, and then when you're doing something like Cocodona, how do you eat not only to, I don't know if this is like the best way of phrasing it, but you obviously want to win, you want to do your best. And how have you figured out how to eat while running where you don't completely feel like garbage and you don't have GI issues?
I mean, we kind of get geeky about like amount of carbs per hour and mainly simple carbs. Proteins and fats are small portions, spread out, 3 to 5+ hours apart. So because they're complex, they're going to slow down the GI tract. So you don't want to have too many of them and not too much volume of it. And then, um, carbs are a constant on an hourly basis on the long stuff. So it's like anywhere from 40 to 60, 70 grams per hour, depending on effort level and, how hard you're pushing. And, electrolytes, dripping electrolytes on a per liter basis. So hydration's really like drink rate per hour plus electrolytes, mainly sodium and potassium. So making sure those are going together in a per liter drink rate. And then the calories are coming in on a simple carbohydrate based gels, powdered drinks, chews, maybe simple stuff like plantain chips or potato chips, fruit, more complex foods for me. I like scrambled eggs, um, maybe some salmon, maybe some avocado, bone broths, mashed potatoes, those kind of things during racing. More during like the 200 scene, 200 plus. In the 100 and under, it's mainly gels. Mainly gels and chews the whole and drink, powdered drink the whole time. Half the calories per hour come from liquid calories with electrolytes, and the other half are coming from gels and chews, and a little bit of like simple stuff off the aid station tables. Fruit or pickle or little simple things like that.
What was it like going from like the 100 milers to the 200 milers? Because you've been doing well in the 200 plus category. Was that a completely different mental construct? Was it different training? Was it a different like, all right, we're going to be out here for 2x to 3x the time?
Yeah, it's really not much different training than 100 milers. You're just training with a little bigger, in some cases, a little heavier pack, right? Because you do have to, the aid stations are farther apart than 100. The 100 miler distance in ultras and below, especially for listeners who aren't very that familiar with ultras, they're going to have aid stations for trail races wherever they can get them in, usually at a road crossing or a highway crossing with the trail or whatever they have access to. So they're usually like 5 to 10 miles apart, aid stations. Let's say average 7 miles, right? In a whole 100 miler. So you might have 14 aid stations in 100, 12 to 14. Whereas in a 200, those aid stations go farther apart. So think like take every other aid station out from 100. So you have about 15, anywhere from 10 to like you could have 25-mile or 30-mile section in a couple of spots where it's really long. You might be out there, 5, 6, 7 hours between aid stations. So it's like a supported long run. So you're doing like a really long run and then getting to resupply. So you might have to carry 3 or 4 liters in some of these races in certain sections. Probably on average, you're carrying about 2 liters in the 200, where you'd only be carrying a liter in the 100 and below. So there's quite a change between those distances in weight that you're carrying on you. So you have to train that, in your long runs, at least specificity in long runs every week with like some kind of a heavier kit, and starting with 3 or 4 liters on you. And, then the pack gets lighter as the long run goes, but you at least are, first few hours, you're having to deal with that weight and get used to it. That's the main differences between those two. And then the sleep strategy, foot care, proactive foot care, those kind of things come into play in the multi-day. Whereas in the 100, you just push straight through one night. In these 200s, it's like 2 days, 2 nights, or 3 days, 2 nights for the leaders. And the back of the pack could be 6 days. So, that's 5 nights, 6 days. So, like at Cocodona, for example. So that kind of gives you like, there's such a wide range of like how long someone's going to be out. We coach our back of the packers and middle of the packers to sleep a little more. Their sleep strategy is going to be totally different than, say, a front of the pack runner, where they're like, I'm only taking 20-minute naps, maybe 3 20-minute naps in a 3-day window, 3 days, 2 nights. Whereas, someone's going to be out there 4 or 5 days. They're taking 90 minutes minimum every night, trying to get a RIM cycle in the middle of the night. Sometimes, if they can afford it, they might take 3 or 4 hours in the middle of it, my night 2 or 3. It depends on what their goals are, how fast they're trying to run, and, what they're, or they're just trying to finish.
I didn't even really think about that with regard for how heavy the pack is, because I've like tuned in with the races quite a bit, but like that's not something that like I've done a lot of 50s. I think that was a sweet spot for me because I was able to do them like in around 10 hours, but anything more than that, I was like, I don't really want to do this. But like going out for like a couple of days, I'm like, man, that's a different sport activity mindset altogether.
Yeah, it is. You settle in for days. But I think the other thing too, yeah, it's just like part of it's just, specificity and getting used to that weight, because I mean, a liter is 2.2 pounds a kilogram. So, if you have 3 liters on you, you're carrying 6.6 pounds in water only, right? And a lot of these races have a required kit, whether it's like a waterproof layer, with a hood, might be pants, waterproof pants, might be, in the front of the pack, we're investing in super light gear, because every ounce matters.
What does it feel like when you're going for a couple of days on less than 2 or 3 hours of sleep? What's going through your mind? Are you doing any caffeine? Are you, you know, tunnel vision, or do you also kind of veer off course and have to get yourself, all right, Jeff, let's continue on this one thing?
It's kind of a little bit of like tunnel vision, a little bit. You're kind of in your own bubble. Um, you kind of ebb and flow depending on like fatigue and if you're managing sleep right. If you're managing sleep right, you're pretty with it if you're kind of balancing your caffeine intake during your waking hours. Um, after day one, I don't caffeinate on day one until after I nap the first nap on night one, because I like to do a small nap on night one, like 20 minutes or something, and then by night two, another maybe night two into day three, somewhere in there, you're going to have like 2 more naps. One might be a night, one might be during the day, but you're trying to like manage that. And if you don't manage it, you're kind of like a zombie. And if you do manage it, you're pretty with it. So it just really depends on what everyone needs. Everyone's a little different individually, and like some people might need more sleep. Some people might be able to function on less sleep. We've got a couple athletes, more front of the pack 200 runners that have trouble sleeping because they have trouble turning their brain off during the race. So they just lay there and don't sleep, even though they need to sleep. So that's always a challenge too. You don't know if you're what type of a person you are, you know, when you go into these multi-days for the first time, and you go to take a 20-minute nap on night one, some people will be like, man, I crashed right out. And that's like a superpower in the multi-day. But there's other people who just like are restless and can't settle down. So, can't shut their brain off. So like if you're that kind of a person, sometimes the multi-days are really tough on you because you're having trouble getting any naps.
What type of person is drawn to this extreme event? I understand, like, I mean, right now running clubs are reaching their pinnacle. Everyone's doing a 2 mile running club on Friday morning, or a 3 mile, and it's a lot of like young single people looking to meet each other. I'm like, okay, that's a demographic. But 100 miles, 200 plus miles, what's the personality type? You seem like you have incredible energy. Is everyone like you, or is everyone a little bit different? I spoke with Katarina Hartmuth a few weeks back, and she has a very methodic, this is what I love to do, and she's very good at what she does, and then she's very humble about it. But what's that look like for you?
Oh, I'm definitely have a lot of energy. If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be an addict or something. I don't know. I'd probably not be on a good path. Uh, based on my tendency to party too much when I was in college. I definitely have trouble sitting still. I funnel it for sure. And there's a lot of us, type A addictive style personalities that we funneled it into endurance sports, instead of, drugs and alcohol or something. Um, but I do, and we have a lot of recovering addicts here in our sport too, so there's that kind of distinct personality type. Most of those people have no problem with motivation to go train. They do have problems when they get injured and they can't train and they can't funnel it. But we also have, the very like engineering, methodical mind, in this sport, that they're like tacticians and spreadsheet gurus and that kind of stuff. And then we have a few like free spirited, fly by the seat of your pants personalities, don't plan at all, just no spreadsheets, no nothing. Just I don't even not even gonna look at my watch, type of people too. Like it's quite an array of personality types. I'd say the one that doesn't last in our sport is the one who is not inherently self motivated. Because you have to do the work in our sport. It's not one you can do kind of half ass. You gotta like commit, and you got to do the work every week in, week out, layer the bricks, of endurance, and just keep doing it. And just getting out the door. Like today, I ran, I embraced this day because it was 38 degrees and raining. And I went and did, instead of a trail run, because the trails are going to be disgusting today, during rain. It drains really fast up here. But the day it's raining, there's going to be a ton of stuff, just water sitting on the trail, So instead of going on the trail, I just did a road loop, but I like used it as an opportunity to test rain gear, rain pants, rain glove, over mitts, jacket, and try to layer appropriately, and use that as an opportunity to go cruise zone 2 recovery run today, and like put the time in, and walk away going, okay, yeah, that gear piece, oh, I had too many layers on for this temp. It's a great day to kind of geek out on gear, versus going, oh, it's raining, and then procrastinating or blowing it off and not running at all.
You seem like you're a bit of a scientist with this.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a balance of like spaz and methodical brain. I'm definitely very detail oriented when it comes to spreadsheets, um, tracking data, HRV. I have wearables that I utilize data from, for like, sweat rate, electrolyte, like sodium concentration per liter of sweat, that kind of stuff, all tracked into, that data is tracked into spreadsheets, and that kind of stuff. I mean, you kind of got to have that personality if you're going to be a coach, I feel like. Um,
So when did
you
you
know,
when was like the time for you when you're like, oh, I can really make a go of this thing? Was it when you started winning? You said in what was it, 2005? You won your first 100 miler. Was that when you're like, okay, like I can do this as a career alongside coaching? I mean, you've been doing this since 2005. I was only 10 years old then, but since I was maybe 15, I've been seeing your face everywhere with the ultra running. Like you have a very distinct look, and I'm like, you're always smiling doing something. I'm like, when was that point for you where like, this is my thing?
Well, I started out, I had my own graphic design business in Bend, Oregon from 2001 to 2017. Um, and that was my main income, was that business. And then I was balancing, I got sponsored in '03, um, and then have been sponsored ever since. So there's been always an athlete bucket, so to speak, which didn't have any money in the 2000s. Not until about 2010, 2011 did we start getting a small stipend on a monthly basis, or an annual basis, depending on the sponsor, and you were like juggling 4 or 5 sponsors just to get a few $1,000s, in the early days. Now that's evolved, since then, right? Over the last 15 years, especially the last 10 years. But like that whole piece of the puzzle, I didn't really start to get an income from running until like, after 2011 probably. And so then there was a small paycheck, and then I could like justify like my training time and some travel time, and I wasn't coming all out of pocket, trying to do all that. And so that whole time I was like geeking out on my own training, reading tons of books, all the famous training books that are out there, Lore of Running, Jack Daniels Method, Arthur Lydiard. I was reading everybody in the early days, and this is and then getting hold of like technique stuff, like pose method, chi running, and all that kind of stuff from a technique perspective. And so I was doing all this stuff just trying to improve my own performance. And then come about, I don't know what year this was. Let's see, it's probably 2014. Um, Ian Sharman, Sharman Ultra Coaching, he had started a coaching business in the early days of like video conferencing and like stuff starting to kind of come online in the early 2010s. He launched a coaching business. It grew pretty quickly because he was one of the first. And then he started bringing assistant coaches under him. And he had grown quite a bit. And in 2014, he came back to Bend. He used to live there, and then he lives there now, but they did a little hiatus down to the Bay Area, and he was up back visiting, looking for a house to buy. We went out for a few beers one night because we were friends. We used to train together when he lived in town, and we used to both be on the ultra team at the same time in the early days. And he was like, "Oh, I've been doing this coaching." And he's like, "You should think about coaching." Like he was the one that kind of put the seed in my head, because I'd always like been pretty geeky about my coaching myself, and then coaching a few friends here and there, but like for free. But he's the first one that kind of put it in my head. Like he said this, and I think this was great advice. I still thank him for this advice whenever I see him. You're only Jeff the athlete for a window of time in your life when you're performing, and this was like, early 2000, like this was the height of me, like really doing well and winning multiple hundreds a year and type thing. And he was like, you're only going to be that for a certain window. He goes, if you can like make a transition to being Jeff the coach instead of Jeff the athlete, you can coach till you're 80. And I was like, that's a really good point. And he goes, now we have all this like technology tools. And and I was like, and I was in tech, I was a graphic designer and UI UX designer, and like helping internet startups and that kind of thing, and doing custom websites. And so like designing for the iPhone, and for mobile, and all, mobile first designs and stuff like that. So I was like inundated in technology already, early adopter of the smartphone, of social media, all those things when they came online. And I was in branding, and that's what graphic design, I was doing branding and marketing. And so like that made sense to me. I was like, this is an emerging career path for the right people. Right. And so that sat in my head for 2 years. And then or maybe 18 months, and mid 2016, or early season, or late spring, I just sent out a social media post that said I'm taking 5 athletes. And I took 5 athletes, and then I took 5 more, and then I took 5 more. And by the time I had 15, being a graphic designer, I had all my back end systems like designed, because I mean, I came from like tech and this admin side of things too, where it's like custom websites with like, you could do all the back in the day when you couldn't do it. We were designing custom sites where you could edit your website and like manage it yourself. And so I had all these developers that I'm really good friends with in Central Oregon. And I was like, okay, I leveraged all those guys, and like we all like I launched this coaching business with a platform, and then a couple years later I outgrew it, and then we did a new platform. So right now we have a platform, and we're continuing to build out technology behind the scenes in our athlete portal. And so it was kind of like a natural transition. When I did that, it just naturally was like all of a sudden it was like 80% graphic design, 20% coaching, 50-50, 80% coaching, 20% graphic. For a while, it was like 60-60 or 80-60. And it was like crazy. I was like juggling 20 design projects and like 20 athletes at the same time. And it was a crazy time. And then I finally, in 2017, was like, I'm done with graphic design. Unless I needed to like kind of manage a old client, like something small, but I couldn't take on any big projects at all. And there's about a year of transition there where I did a couple of design projects for old clients, and then kind of told them, hey, you need to find a new person. And that was like, so since 2017, it's been full time coaching and athlete, and no only graphic designs just for my own business,
Is is that what excites you? Like, is that what gets you going every day, that you're like, let's rock and roll? Whereas if maybe you still had to do the graphic design and you weren't really sponsored, so to speak, and you didn't have all your clients, would the ultra running, would that suffer if you weren't like
Well,
getting that
ultra running
motivation?
always was like always butting heads with graphic design, because you're on a deadline basis. So there'd be some weeks where you're like only working 20, 30 hours a week. And then there'd be other weeks you're working 50 or 60 on a deadline. And if that hit during a race or during big training volume blocks, it was just like they so butted heads, and it was really challenging. And then in coaching, on the other hand, is subscription based. So it's consistent every week. Like I have so many calls a week, and I have so many plans to write a week, and they're all scheduled out. And there's not a lot of like surprises, so that's one thing that I mean I really appreciate about coaching. I love coaching, and coaching I'm talking about nutrition and running and training and performance and geeking out all the time, which is great. I love it. So it was a great change. It was definitely complemented the athlete side a lot. The coaching business, just because they weren't at odds anymore.
I understand that. No, it's funny because I went on your ultra sign up, and currently you have 157 races there, and that's not something that
Yeah, and
just
that
happens
isn't even all
overnight.
of them, man.
I bet, yeah.
I mean, I think it's 200 and something. I don't know how many. It's over 200 at this point. It's a lot, a lot of ultras.
What's your wife say about it? Does she love it, or does she kind of like, you say, hey, I'm going to do Cocodona again? Does she give you kind of an eye roll, or is she like, hey, I'm in your corner, let's do this thing?
It depends on if I try to bite off more than I can chew. Like she's not a big fan of when I did the Colorado Trail FKT in 2024. She wasn't super stoked on that project because I mean that's that's 7 days, 9 hours of running, with hardly any sleep, maybe 12 hours of sleep in that week. So it's like that was just she just watches me like burn too many matches and like think this is not good for you. So now she's pretty okay with, for a while it was like, why do you have to do 200s? Hundreds are awesome. Like just do hundreds. You're good at them. Like why you got to like go over these 200s? Then once I did a 500 mile, or 490-mile Colorado Trail, now 200s don't seem that bad. So she's okay with the 200s now. It's just a matter of perspective, I suppose. Once you go farther, then you go back to 200, it doesn't seem like that much. But I am getting better at them too. Every one you learn something more. I feel like so. Um, yeah, she's very supportive. There's definitely times where she's like, I don't want to talk about running, because she's not a runner. She plays pickleball every day. So, and homeschools our kids. So it's not, ultra running is not her passion, but she has learned, she's been around it for 25 years, and she's shared in my, you know, my success and my agony of defeats. And, so she's right alongside me, and now that the kids are older, she for years I didn't make her crew or go to any races. I did a lot of solo projects. I'd even go to races solo and just off drop bags, no pacers. Go win 100 off drop bags and no pacers, and then drive home because we had little kids. You know, but now my youngest is 14, my oldest is 23, so it's like I've got more time. We've got more time. She can take off for 3 days and help me. And, I always have a crew of dudes that I trust that have been in my corner for over a decade. So she always is, and they all know each other. So it's like getting the band back together when we do some kind of big project.
What's in the pipeline for you over the next year, 2 years, 3 years? What are you excited
Cocodona
about?
2026. I'm signed up again. I'll do some, build up races this spring, probably more local, like Phoenix stuff. Some of the Aero Viper races probably. Um, and then I'm focusing. It depends on lotteries. Right now it's lottery season. The next like 2 months, we find out like what we're in for 2026. So I'm in the Hard Rock Lottery. If I get into that, I'll run. That'll be a focus in July. After Cocodona. If I don't get in that, then I have a plan B, projects. Also, talking to, hopefully, we'll see. I'm gonna try to get into tour the 330K in Italy, in September. That's a possibility. We'll see. I just kind of want to check that one off. That's one of those like bucket lists I really want to do. Yeah, I don't
That
know.
sounds
We'll see what the lotteries bring.
that's awesome. Are your kids gonna get into running at all? Or
No, my oldest one was USA climber. He's finishing up an IT program right now. He graduates in May. My middle one, my daughter, is a barista. I don't know what she's going to do. She's taking a gap year and trying to figure it out. And my youngest is 14. He's into fencing. My daughter played soccer and like ultimate frisbee was her main kind of two things she really got into. She was in climbing for a couple years, but then kind of like didn't really love it like my son oldest did. And then my younger one, he's done some running. He should be the runner in our family. He's got like the natural, like smooth stride, the mentality. Um, so maybe that'll be a later acquired taste. No pressure, you know. But he's really into fencing right now. That's his kind of sport, and he does some like the whole new thing. This wasn't around when I was a kid, but like a lot of gymnastics gyms are doing like what they call ninja warrior training or like parkour types classes. He does one of those once a week with some buddies, some other homeschool boys that we're friends with. So they have like a homeschool class that's middle of the day when everyone else is in, all the public school kids are in school. They have a class for like homeschool kids. So he's in that class once a week. He's almost about to be too old for it, so he'll have to move on, and he'll probably focus more. He really likes fencing, so that's our sport at the moment. That and guitar.
my that's awesome. My last question, I'm curious to know from you because you spanned like nearly 3 decades in the sport is how has ultra running changed, and are you excited about the future for it? Because it is becoming way more popular than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I'm really excited to know your answer before I talk with Dean.
Yeah, I mean we're still having like the bell curve growth, like that's almost vertical. It's growing so much. I mean, it's such a big. It's just changed so much. I mean, when I got into it, it was a tiny, tiny little cult sport. Um, no one knew anything about it. There weren't any documentaries on. I mean, there was like one documentary or two, one on Leadville, one on Western States. Um, it just no one had heard of it. None of my family had heard of it. Now it's like because of social media and YouTube and doing these like smaller documentaries that can be, don't need a giant budget to push out a 45-minute documentary on, some, whether it's Barkley or whether it's Hard Rock or, you know, I've been in multiple, documentaries over the years now with sponsors just sponsoring like 15-minute ones or a couple of hour plus ones now that are really bringing like a lot of attention to our sport in the last 5 years, where you have people going, that never would have known what an ultra runner is, knows what the sport is now. Um, so like that's been a big change. The brands throwing money at it has been a bigger change in the last 10 years. That's been really a fun part of the sport to be part of, where there's actually contracts and actually like monthly stipends, going to athletes. So they don't have to, some of our top end of the sport right now don't have to have day jobs. When I got in the sport, if you were a sponsored athlete, you had to have a day job. You were getting some free gear. You might be getting a little help to travel, but that's it. And then that evolved into like a little bit of money. And then that evolved into like actually a part-time salary type size salary to now a salary for our top fast athletes that are really competing at the kind of the spear point, that's been a cool change in my opinion. I think that you know if I if I was young right now and getting into ultra running, like that's a cool aspect of the potential to be like, I don't have to have a day job. I just have to perform and train. That's pretty cool. Right. So, and it also, I think the other thing that I think that's changed is the social media aspect, right? Which has opened up like a whole nother demographic of not just, oh, I don't have to necessarily be crazy fast at that spear point we're talking about. You could be, for me, for example, I'm more into like, I'm older now. So it's like longevity and like performance and longevity is kind of my brand, so to speak. Right? But that can be its own thing that has value in our space, right? From like a marketing perspective. So brands, it allows brands to be able to like support someone like me. Maybe I'm not getting the salary that the people are on the spear point, but I'm still getting a salary, to like at least put an hourly around my training time each week, which is nice to have that support. So I don't have to carry a full-time coaching load, to make ends meet. I can actually like have less athletes than a full-time load on a weekly basis and then have this little bucket of like running, income that allows me to still train hard and try to perform and see what's possible in your mid 50s.
I'm excited to see what happens with the sport, and I hope to see you like in 10 years from now, just continuing to hit these podiums. I think that would be really fun just to continue these conversations and be like, okay, so
Well,
what are you doing at 54, 55, 56?
yeah, I
And
mean,
you
for
just have like the same
sure.
amount of energy.
Well, I mean, I at this point, that's kind of the goal. The goal has shifted. Once I hit my 50s, it's like, okay, well, we're in uncharted territory now. Like, to be able to like still perform in your 50s and try to win some races. They may not be like A level races, but I can do well in a B level race or a C level race at my age. You might be able to win it still. And also just going after like career numbers at this point. Once you've been in the sport this long, you start look. I'm putting up, second most 100-mile wins in the world. Like continuing to add to that if I can. Right, doing the other things like all of a sudden like looking at things like bigger races like Western States and saying, oh, maybe I want to go after the 50 to 59 record and then the 60 to 69 record. You know, so when, historical big races like Western States that are like our Super Bowl of ultra running in North America, when when I'm old and 80, I can say, yeah, I'm the fastest 50 to 59 guy on that course or whatever. So I'm shifting my focus a little bit now. And I'm still really geeky about footwear, and I've been in footwear development now, um, in testing and design side from a consulting perspective for well over a decade, since about 2012, so 12 years, 13 years now. So like I'm really want to continue to like be on that side of the kind of the brand side, helping footwear brands like innovate and improve their product and stuff like that. And, I'm really passionate about that side of the business as well.
Well, like what I'm taking from all of this is that from the amount of like triathletes I've spoken with and ultra runners and bodybuilders, there are some people who just want to like push, 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 and everything else just happens to be like, oh yeah, I eat my food, yeah, I have my shoes, yeah, I kind of do my training. I feel like you want to look at every single little variable, and it's like exciting. And it's like that's why it's never going to die out for you, because you want to know every
Well,
little
there's always a
minuscule thing.
puzzle piece to fine tune.
Yeah. If anyone's having a bad day, they should just call you up.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many moving parts, especially the longer the race. It's just like it's something that we have on a regular conversation and coaching calls with people who are doing the 200 plus distance, just how many puzzle pieces, and if you mess one up on day one, how it comes back to bite you big time on day three, and could cost you 5 hours, 6 hours of time, a half of 25% of a day, right? So like you can really, like, there's so many moving parts that it's just like they're in your head. It's this Shangri-La of like if I get everything right, and you're never going to get every single piece right, so you're never going to be like satisfied, so you always have to strive to like improve whatever that means for you. Some for our back of the Packers, it might be a different goal than the front of the pack, but still everybody has their own goals.
Jeff, this was awesome. This was so much fun. Thanks for coming on today. Where can people keep track of everything you're doing?
Main place would be kind of three places. My website is giddyupultra.com. That's coaching, business, and just bio on me and that kind of stuff. And then Instagram is another good place. I have a ton of links in my bio and on Instagram, so if you wanted to find me in other places. And then YouTube. So both Instagram and YouTube are at Go Bronco, or sorry, YouTube is at Giddy Up Ultra, and Instagram is at Go Bronco Billy.
Where did the Go Bronco Billy come from?
I have a really good buddy who, when I first got in the sport, we were well, okay. So I had climbed in the late '90s in Denver with a buddy from Wyoming who always used to yell "Giddy up," and we were all this whole circle of climbers that traveled together all the time. We did all these, for a couple of years there, we were big into climbing, and that was my main sport. And so we're sport climbing, bouldering, stuff like that, and going every weekend. We were going to some crag, and we all climbed in the gym regularly together. So we all saw each other like 4 or 5 days a week. It was our little social circle. And one of the guys in that circle used to yell "Giddy up" all the time because he's from Wyoming. And I grew up in Missouri on a farm. So I was like immediately adopted "Giddy up" because I was like, dude, that is like killer. It's like the term that you can like kind of put negatively, positively, neutral. You can use it in so many different ways. And from a branding marketing perspective, my branding brain was just like latched onto that term. And so I just started using it all the time too. And our whole group did, but I kept using it after I quit climbing, and I was running with this buddy, and we had this joke, like he was claimed to be direct descendant from like the Berserker tribe of Norse descent, and a Viking. And he's very Viking looking. Jason Moyer is his name. He was the fastest dude in Bend in ultra running when I got into the sport. So he was kind of a mentor to me. And we used to train together when I just had one kid in the house, little baby in the house, and I still had some leeway to get away for like a couple days to train. And he and I used to go on trips together. I paced him, and we used to I grew up in a space in the Midwest where you're not allowed to pick your own nickname. Like it has to be earned somehow and someone else picks it for you. So um, I was calling him Berserker because he claimed to be from the Berserker tribe. So I nicknamed him Berserker, and he nicknamed me because of Giddy Up. He nicknamed me Bronco Billy. And so I don't know where Bronco Billy came from, but he just started calling me Bronco Billy. And then when I was like, blogs were blogs were so popular in like the 2000s. And I mean, they were like social media right now, right? That was the early social media. And so I was an early adopter of a blog, and I was, in design and tech. And I was like, oh, I need a domain. I'm like, well, Jeff Browning wasn't available. Bronco Billy wasn't available. And then I was like, well, what about runbroncobilly.com? It was available, and gobroncobilly.com was available. And I was like, well, what if I get injured and I can't run anymore and I have to go back to my mountain bike? So I was like, I just need an action word. So that's where Go Bronco Billy came from. And then when social media hit, I grabbed Go Bronco Billy everything because I already had gobroncobilly.com, where I did my blogs. And then that evolved into Giddy Up Ultra as a coaching business. It started out as Go Bronco Billy, but now I have other coaches. I have 4 other coaches now, so it isn't just Bronco Billy. So we evolved the brand into Giddy Up Ultra, and that's where we are now, GiddyUpUltra.com. I still have GoBroncoBilly.com, but it's kind of a holding pattern of just me as an athlete. But I don't really do anything on that website. So that's the background of Bronco Billy. I did not pick it
That's an
myself.
awesome like. No, that's like an incredible alter ego that was like earned and given to you by a good friend. That's awesome.
I did massage it. I would say that, from a brand perspective, and honestly, okay, you know how like in mindset training, um, I know we're supposed to end, but there's one more thing. So in
It's all
mindset
good.
training, so mindset training, one of the things that can help you is like looking like having almost an alter ego where you're like, okay, this person, like when it gets tough, this person is who comes out, and I jokingly kind of leverage that in my blogs because it was for my family, mainly my extended family in the Midwest. We're like, what are you doing in Oregon? Like running 100 milers? Are you crazy? All the way through the night in the woods? Are you stupid? So like I was kind of putting photos and I was trying to make it funny, because I was a designer and marketing person. So I was like, I was trying to write it as an article that had some comedy in it. And I created Bronco Billy to be this like alter ego that doesn't come out to the second half of the race, because you can't let him out in the first half of the race because he likes to race. He likes to run hard, so you got to keep him in his stable for a while, and then you can let him out, right? He's stomping the ground and snorting and wanting to go. So it was kind of a joke, but it also became kind of like this mindset alter ego in races where it was like, okay, I'm Jeff in the first half, Bronco Billy in the second half, that he comes out like a vengeance and like leaves it on the course. So, it definitely helped in the early days of like, I didn't even know I've done a bunch of studying on like neuroscience now. And I realized like, wow, I was using like really good positive mindset neuroscience techniques, but didn't know that's what I was doing, So um, that's kind of the background.
Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Yeah, it's just like the power of having that alter ego of like when you need to turn it on, you can totally turn it on. And it ingrains those neural pathways to train you to do that through like operant conditioning or whatever it's
Yeah,
called.
it's almost like flipping a switch and that guy like comes out, to play hard. So,
Jeff, this has been awesome. Thank you for chatting with me today.
yeah, man, it was my pleasure. Giddy up.
Giddy up.